week after week, as I stand before you as pastor, as preacher, as, well, whatever role you particularly want to see me in, one of the core things that I just really believe, particularly in this day and age, very, very important for us all to grasp, is the incredible love of God for each and every one of us. And that love certainly is something that we need to be reminded of when circumstances seem to run contrary to that simple statement of faith, that there is a God and this God loves us. And that God loves us not in spite of our sin, but even within it. And in a few moments, as we celebrate Holy Communion together, we'll certainly have the reminder of just how much God embraces us, even when we find it difficult to embrace ourselves or to reach up to Him. But nevertheless, there are those seasons where it just seems like, where is God? Where God, for some inscrutable reason, seems to be perhaps more distant, or at least seems to be delaying something in our lives that would so much make a difference in our personal experience. And so much, we believe at least, would bring a degree or a greater measure of comfort or of success or of whatever it is we need to do. And it's times like this where I think it's appropriate that we ask a very simple question: where is God when times of delay happen? And corporately right now, I'm just going to let you know that probably one of the most obvious experiences of that in the life of this congregation in the last 2 or 3 years is our efforts to add on to our facility. Several times over the last few months, we have come to you and offer to you an approximate window of time when you can expect to see bulldozers and earth moving and concrete blocks showing up and all the tangible things that say, yes, we really are going to build this building, okay? And what you need to know is that every time that has been done, it's been done on information that we have received. We haven't been picking dates out of the air or doing guesswork or, have some sort of Ouija board experience where you try to get... We really have tried to be faithful as we knew how to be, to keep you informed based on the information that we have. And I should mention also today that normally Gary Evans would be doing this little bit of update. Gary Evans chairs our building committee. He is in Alabama this weekend visiting his daughter, who is a student at the University of Alabama. So I guess I get stuck with sharing this part of it too. And so, and each of those windows has come and gone, to the point where I fully, truly understand the question marks that begin to rise in the back of our minds that say something like this: is this really going to happen? Okay, well, let me tell you this morning, it is really going to happen. And let me just kind of give you a little bit of a survey of what's been happening, and then I'm almost hesitant to give you a window again. But at the same time, we think you can handle it. And then we're going to talk together for a few moments this morning about why does God allow delay. So actually, the very first time I came to Harvester in July of 2008, there was already conversation about our need for expanding facilities. So I suppose we could go back, perhaps, at least in my experience here, at least 5 years, to the beginnings of the conversation in terms of what to build, when to build it, how to build it, and all those questions circulating and around. And there was a period of time where we were a part of discussions of probably maybe a dozen United Methodist churches in our general area, which delayed this process because all those churches were asked to hold off a bit on any expansion plans as some analyzation and research was done in terms of just our combined influence in the area and how better we might work together to accomplish our common ends and as the United Methodist Church. So that brought a major delay, so we put off the discussions there. And there's been a number of things like that along the way. But finally, a year and a half ago, we went through our capital campaign and asked you to begin contributing specifically to funds that would be set aside over and above our tithe and offering specifically to launch this building. And then we went to work with the process of hiring an architect, an engineer, and all the people you need to do what we need to do. And last May, we all sat down with the officials at the Pasco County Planning Center and said, this is what we're looking to do. We had all our preliminary documents together, all our plans together, and that's when they began to tell us, well, here's about when I think you can expect approval. And so based upon those statements, we pass that on to you. Along the way, they've required some changes to be made to our plans. Some for the better, some for the good. At one point, we had a huge landscaping requirement that they were going to require. Some of you may know this because we've joked about it, but we were going to need to plant about 100 extra trees on this property. We were going to turn this not into Harvester United Methodist Church, but Harvester United Park. I mean, I thought you want us to put in, like nature trails and everything else too. That eventually was rescinded. And by the way, I'm going to be very careful here. I'm not here to point fingers at Pasco County. That's not the purpose we're here. But you need to know some of the things that have gone on. And you also need to know that your building committee has faithfully responded to each of these requests and needs very expeditiously, and we've tried our best to respond as best we know how. Where we thought there an argument could be made for a change, we would make that. Where we felt like we just needed to go ahead, and so Gary and the committee have been working very, very hard. Our financing for the project was approved last August, and so we've essentially been ready to go. A week ago, I got a call from the county, or actually I got a call from Gary, our building chairman, who had received a call from the county that we were going to have to resubmit another portion of the plans yet again. And the first questions we asked, of course, well, what's this going to cost in terms of money and time? Well, fortunately, the good news is it's not going to cost us basically anything by way of extra money. It is, however, going to cost us a little bit by way of extra time. So, all that said, we are looking now at a window sometime between mid-March and the 1st of April for actual commencing of construction. Now, we wanted to be seeing that happen sometime around the beginning of last October, and so it's a bit of a delay. And there are a couple things that I think you all need to know. First of all, I want you to be informed. We want you to be informed. There's no desire here to try to hide. But on the other hand, there's so much detail, we just feel like we can't tell you all the time everything that's going on. The other thing is to let you know, like I said, that our building team has been very conscientious. They deserve your cheers and your prayers because they really have been working on your behalf in incredible ways. Not just them, but a few others. So, I know when things get delayed, you begin to wonder, but just know that they've been carrying this concern and doing so on your behalf in an incredibly way of integrity and hard work. The other thing is relative to finances. I want to say this, is that most, if not all of you, have been contributing generously to the building fund because of that, okay? Anytime we do a project like this, there's a significant, what we call soft cost involved with that. It's all the upfront costs of paying architects and engineers, plan developments and permitting, all that, which is rather substantial. And because of your generosity, we know that we were going to have to secure financing to complete the project. But while our financing is approved, we have not had to borrow one extra dollar to this point. We have paid all the expenses up front so far on this project in cash. And now the time will come when we do need to begin drawing on our approved construction loan. We've not had to do that during this whole time. And that's something that I think you can praise God for, and that your gifts have been at work, even though you can't see the visible results of them yet. Now, if you want me to roll out the architectural plans, I can do that for you. We have all that available. But there has been tangible work going on. All that to say, I understand we wanted to bring you up to speed, but I also think as pastor, I want to take a few moments this morning to actually ask that question. Where is God when he seems to delay the fulfillment of something that makes so much sense and would make so much difference especially in the work of his kingdom. And to do that, we're going to stick with Proverbs again today. And for those of you that may have been diligent to go to the website and look at the passage that we were going to look, we've changed things up slightly today. Not completely, because I felt like this was a question that we needed to approach together. And despite some of the delays and maybe even some of the frustration we have with launching into commencing our construction, God's still at work. And God's still going to accomplish his work in his time. In Proverbs chapter 16, these words, we can make our own plans, but the Lord gives the right answer. People may be pure in their own eyes, but the Lord examines their motives. Commit your actions to the Lord, and your plans will succeed. The Lord has made everything for his own purposes, even the wicked for a day of disaster. The Lord detests the proud, they will surely be punished. Unfailing love and faithfulness make atonement for sin. By fearing the Lord, people avoid evil. When people's lives please the Lord, even their enemies are at peace with them. Better to have little with godliness than to be rich and dishonest. We can make our plans, but the Lord determines our steps. Now, like most of the Proverbs are a collection of wise sayings. And to some extent, there are portions of the book of Proverbs that are grouped somewhat thematically. There are portions where it's just a list of wise sayings that don't necessarily relate directly to one another. The passage that I just read to you this morning, I suppose, is somewhat a mixture of both of those. Because if you listen carefully, there were several statements made in that list of proverbial sayings that talk about the fact that sometimes, though we plan, it doesn't work out, but that God is still involved in that issue. It's the mysterious, sometimes almost inexplicable relationship between our planning and God's will. Then sometimes it's very, very difficult to understand, given all our plans and all our expectations, why God doesn't seem to be able to work in a way that we would expect him to do so accordingly. And so these passages tell us the fact that even in the midst of our planning, even in the midst when plans change, when plans aren't fulfilled, that God is still present in them, that we can plan our way, but God directs a step. What does it mean by that? It means that we can make all the plans in the world we want, but God is still going to superintend the process in our personal lives and in our corporate lives according to his plan, according to his purposes. Now, God does this by offering to become a part of the planning process. I'm a horrible dancer. My wife can attest to that. You do not want me to be your dance partner. You're going to have several broken toes after the experience. It really doesn't go. I'd be stepping all over them. Contrary to me, God's a very good dancer. And God doesn't step on your toes. He simply says, can I step in? In other words, we're dancing and we're making plans together. And God simply comes up behind us, tap on the shoulder, and says, may I have this dance? God never forces himself into a process, but God does invite you to invite him into the process. And when we do so, God has the capability of doing several different things. What does God do? What is God doing when we invite him into the planning process? Well, firstly, God can strengthen us or empower us. If you've not noticed this so far, sometimes when we have plans, God, from our perspective at least, gives us less than maybe we expected. And it's perceived as somewhat less. Or perhaps God does it in a time frame that's longer than we would prefer to expect. And during these times, God uses them to strengthen our faith in such a way that, for example, he teaches us a bit of patience. Now, I don't know about you, but I can always use an extra spoonful of patience in my life. I am not by nature a patient person. I am one of those people that likes closure, likes to check things off and move on to the next project. Whatever it may be, that's just kind of my personality. Living with loose ends over a period of time is not my preferred lifestyle. And yet there are times when we have to enter into this lifestyle. And we live in such a culture. We live in such a culture, we've been trained for immediate gratification. that I believe, especially perhaps in our culture, where we feel like, I can pick up the phone or I can, spend my money and I immediately get what I want, that sometimes God stretches out the time period just because, you know what? Patience truly is a virtue. Amen. Love is patient. Love is kind. These are all things that God wants to build into our lives. So sometimes when God delays, it's simply because He wants to strengthen us. And He can't strengthen us if He just continues to allow us to run on the same treadmill we've always been running on. He needs to change it up a bit on us. Sometimes God delays, not simply to empower us or to strengthen us, but to enable us. Sometimes God delays, not so much that we might experience less, but that He might do more than we would have expected otherwise. And I think this is certainly true of God. For example, when we invite God into our planning process, for one thing, God can improve a decision. God can improve a decision. If you've ever been a part of a planning process that involves more than one person, don't you realize as you compare notes and get different vantage points on that decision, most of the time you end up with a better decision. Now, I realize that road can be rocky because sometimes, certain members of the team have a pretty good idea of the way they think it ought to go, and sometimes getting everybody on the same page, well, it can be a bit of an adventure. I get that. But nevertheless, most of us would probably agree that when we have several different people working a decision from several different vantage points, we usually end up with a wiser, more informed decision that usually we would consider to be better. How much more so when we invite God into the decision-making process? I mean, whose perspective would we want more? And it's so easy just to kind of bypass that step even for Christians. So sometimes God can improve the decision. The other thing that God can do that I see in this passage, He helps us implement a decision. A man's mind plans his way, but the Lord directs his steps. One thing that verse tells me is that we are not sufficient in ourselves to accomplish the plans that we come up with. And so one of the benefits of inviting God into the planning process is not simply that He can give us a better decision, but He can help us implement that decision by giving us insight and power and strength and whatever else was resourcing to allow that decision to be more than a decision, to allow it to become a reality. Sometimes when we invite God into the decision-making process, not only does He improve a decision or help us implement it, sometimes He prevents a decision. Sometimes in the process of inviting God into it, we begin to realize that's a bad idea. Didn't look like a bad idea. Didn't seem like, in fact, it seemed like a really good idea at the time. Now, I know you've never always been there. Never been there. Where you've made a decision, you've implemented it, you got to the point, and after the fact you go, what was I thinking? I mean, I know you've never been there, but I know. It's not fun. And sometimes God will, if we invite God in the process, God prevents us from going there in the first place because He can open our eyes and open our minds to say, you know what seemed like such a good idea wasn't such a good idea after all, and so we stopped, and He saves us a bit of pain and grief in the first place. So inviting God into the planning process, He may improve a decision, He may help us implement a decision, He may prevent a bad decision. But here's the one thing that really is truly unique about God. All those other things that we talked about there, those are things we can help each other with. The other thing that's unique about inviting God into the decision-making process is God can also redeem a decision. God can also redeem a decision. What do I mean by that? Sometimes, despite our best efforts, we do make decisions that were probably not the best ones to make. They were mistakes. In some cases, it's outright sin. And yet, even in the midst of that, when God is invited in, God can redeem that decision. What do I mean by that? First of all, He can redeem us. We can experience the forgiveness and grace to go, despite the fact that I made a bad decision, that I may have sinned, that I may have gone contrary to the will of God, that God still loves me, God still forgives me, and He's not holding that against me. And I continue to live life knowing that I'm a redeemed child of God, that I am no longer bound and obligated to the mistakes that I have made. And that God truly does redeem it. So He can redeem the heart. He can often redeem the effects of the decision if we allow Him to become a part of the process, which is really, really the key issue. When God taps you on the shoulder and says, may I have this dance?
That's really the key decision that we're making. You see, when God enters into the decision-making process, He may improve it, He may implement it, He may prevent us from going somewhere, but ultimately He can redeem a decision. And He can redeem us, even the poor ones that we made. And then, in addition to strengthening us or enabling us, let me just say the obvious. There are times when God delays or allows delay. We just don't know. We really can't find a satisfying answer to the question, why didn't God do this? Or why didn't God do such and such sooner? There are times in our life with God, there are times in our discipleship experience, if it's real and authentic, where we're going to find our place in time and say, you know what, if I'm truly honest, without putting some sort of spiritual veneer over it, where I'm going to look at the situation, I'm going, I really don't know. Or we really don't know why God delayed. And folks, this is the time when God isn't even that much worried about strengthening you or enabling you or us. He simply wants to embrace us. It's when the I don't know times, these are the signals that we are in a season where God simply wants to embrace us as His children with no agenda. To simply experience life with Him in relationship without the expectation that He has to do something to maintain it. Sometimes we get into this situation with God and we talk about answered prayer, which is important, and we see God answered prayer, but sometimes it doesn't work out the way we expect. And sometimes we need something to center ourselves again, but we easy to slip into a relationship with God where He's like our genie. And because we've rubbed His bottle, He's obligated to give us our 3 wishes. And when He doesn't, boy, we get ticked off. And we tell Him, don't you know you're our genie? He says, I am? I thought I was your dad. I thought I was your father. I thought I was the one who paid the cost of your... I thought, and he just... Hey, can we back up and could I just have this dance with you and maybe we can revisit our relationship? You see, there are times in delay we don't know, and in those times of delay, God simply wants to embrace us and remind us who He is, irrespective of what He can do for us. And wants to teach us that we can trust and love Him and enjoy a relationship with Him even when we're not getting all our expectations met. We come to the communion table, we remember this morning just how far God went to embrace us. Because I recognize the fact that this is true. That in times when we don't see God at work, or God isn't working according to the timetable that at least we would prefer, that we need something that we can look at, something tangible to remind us that God is still at work, that God is still working in our lives, something we can return to. When Jesus died on Calvary's cross some 2,000 years ago, and the night before that happened, when He had that Last Supper with the disciples, life was about to change radically. But you have to remember that for thousands of years prior to Advent, the nation of Israel had prayed for and longed for a deliverer. And in their minds, the deliverer was something very different than who Jesus turned out to be. Primarily a political deliverer, one that would alleviate their earthly suffering and earthly oppression. And while there is an aspect of that to God's deliverance, what God finally brought to them was so much more than just that. God brought them redemption. God brought them eternity. You see, sometimes when God delays, He really does give us more than we expected. And certainly in that period of time, people were wondering, is God going to send a deliverer? We're so fortunate this morning because we can look at a specific event at a specific point in time. We can look at specific words and say, yes, He did. So folks, whether it's individually as a church, when we go through times of delay, perhaps the elements remind us in some way greater than we could possibly remind ourselves that God is still present in the delay. He may be strengthening us. He may be empowering us, or he may just be embracing us. But he's still here. And so, as you come this morning and partake of the elements of communion, and I'll invite Kim to come as we prepare to distribute them. I remind you that these represent the broken body in the bread and the shed blood of Christ in the cup, both of which were the body broken for us and the blood that was shed for us. And I invite you maybe just to share a silent prayer with God as you receive the elements this morning, thanking him for this reminder that despite delays, despite circumstances, God remains present in our lives.